I'm Mayra Ceja, and you're listening to Venture Unplugged. From deep tech crypto to direct-to-consumer brands and products, each week we dive in deep into the lives and challenges of today's most successful founders and investors. New episodes launch every Tuesday. Sign up for our newsletter at ventureunplugged.com and subscribe on iTunes or Spotify. Follow me on Twitter at Mayra Ceja 007. I'm really excited about part one of my conversation with Mike Novogratz, the founder and CEO of Galaxy Digital. In this episode, we learn about Mike's fascinating stories of personal and professional growth, why he launched Galaxy, and his latest insights on Bitcoin and blockchain. This episode is brought to you by Qtum and AWS. Qtum is the first proof-of-stake smart contracts blockchain. It has been around for over 2 years and has over 4,000 nodes around the globe. If you're tired of paying high fees on other smart contract platforms, head over to qtum.org. That's QTUM.org and start building your own low-fee Solidity smart contract today. This podcast is co-presented by Blockworks Group and Republic. Blockworks Group is a blockchain events and media production company. For exclusive content and events that provide insight into the crypto and blockchain space, visit them at blockworksgroup.io. Republic is an investment platform that helps companies raise capital from retail investors. For more information, please visit republic.co. Today, I'm thrilled to have Mike Novogratz, the founder and CEO of Galaxy Digital, which media giants quickly named the Goldman Sachs of crypto. Mike became a Bitcoin legend when he famously predicted its meteoric rise. But this episode is about so much more than just Mike's legendary status. It's about his stories of building confidence, connectivity, and resilience. But don't you worry, crypto fans. Mike also includes his latest insights on Bitcoin and blockchain. Prior to Galaxy, Mike had his own meteoric rise, from growing up middle class to getting his undergrad degree at Princeton, starting his career as a helicopter pilot, eventually becoming partner at Goldman Sachs, and later partner and president of Fortress Investment Group. Mike's journey is full of stories you don't want to miss. Now, enjoy the show. And if you like this episode, share it with a friend. Hi, Mike. I'm so excited to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Are you ready to have some fun today?
Let's do it.
I've always admired you for a couple of different reasons. One, you're such a legend on Wall Street and also in the Bitcoin community. You've also had incredibly strong opinions and willing to voice them, and you're just such a great storyteller. I met you about 2 years ago where we did a fireside chat at Princeton. And in this episode, I want to go in a little bit deeper into some of those stories. But I figured we'd start from the beginning. Why don't we just start from your childhood? What were you like as a child?
I was born into a big family, which has been, part of what's defined me, right? You're born into a big family, you're more communal, you're, I think, more willing to take risks in lots of ways because you have to do something to be seen in a big family. You also, if you screw up and you fall down, I have 6 brothers and sisters. I'm one of 7, 6 brothers and sisters to kind of pick you up. And when you do too well, they give you shit. And so I think part of, my childhood is just being defined by, that family. We were middle class. My dad was in the Army. We lived, what I used to say, we lived in a John Hughes movie, high school with cheerleaders and prom kings and queens and athletes and freaks and jocks and geeks and the band. And I say all that because, living in New York City, it's a completely different existence. My kids don't have that kind of John Hughes-y middle class upbringing. And, I think in a lot of ways it was idyllic. I went to an amazing public high school. I think about the state of education today, and if every public school was like Fordham High School, we'd be in a much better shape as a country. And that was a high school where, the community bought in. It was the center of our universe. And parents bought in, teachers bought in, the local stores bought in. And so I literally think I was a real product of, government support in some ways, right? I went from a great public high school, then I got a ROTC scholarship to Princeton, and so the government paid for my education. But I think that basic upbringing, it was no different than a ton of other suburban kids, is where I came from.
That sounds incredibly wonderful and idyllic. You mentioned Princeton. Talk to us about your experience there. I know wrestling played a huge part in your life there.
Yeah, I showed up at Princeton having been kind of the big man on campus in high school, or at least thought I was a great athlete, and I was smart, and I was, social. And I got to Princeton, and I was like, oh shit, I'm not nearly as smart as all these kids. I'm not nearly as good of an athlete as all these kids. And I think a lot of kids show up at college with that same feeling. It's humbling, and over time, I finally, it wasn't until my junior year that I really made the varsity wrestling team. But once I did, in my senior year, I did better. You gain confidence. Academically, I kind of think waste is too strong of a word, but I didn't really take advantage of the awesomeness of the Princeton education because I was intimidated. And so I took easier courses, and I took a few difficult courses, but it was always, how do I get through, as opposed to how do I really experience it and really take advantage of it. And it's funny, my kids who have gone there now, they take far harder courses, and they've gotten far more out of the academic side than I did, partly because they came with a lot more confidence academically, because I went to these good schools in New York and had been around so many people that have gone there. And so it wasn't until I was at flight school in a lot of ways. In the Army, they took this test, and I was one of 700 odd pilots, and I did best on some standardized test, and it snapped, hey, you're pretty smart. And I had this little confidence jolt. I wish I'd had it 3 years earlier. I think I would have done better at school. But I think about that a lot. What in life gives someone that upstep in confidence? I saw my own daughter who went to Horace Mann High School here, which is one of the toughest private high schools in the country, and so many smart kids. And she graduated, fine, but probably middle of her class. But she was always surrounded by all these smart kids, and so she had this side of her, and this is my interpretation, that felt smart but not that smart. And then went to Princeton, and then the same thing. And it wasn't until she took a semester abroad with her boyfriend, who had gone to Northwestern, and they went to Hong Kong for a semester, and she realized, wait, I'm really one of the smartest kids in this whole place, that her confidence shifted. And then she came back in her last 2 years at school, she crushed it. She was runner-up in the thesis prize and graduated with honors or high honors, and had a whole different academic confidence. And so I think about that both when I mentor people at work, with my own kids, with other people's kids, is what is that moment that you can help someone in, or they're going to have to find it themselves, where they get the confidence jump. Because so much of success and then fulfillment comes from feeling you're good enough to do something.
How do you yourself, you've had a lot of up and downs, how do you get your confidence back? I imagine it doesn't stay steady, does it?
It's a good question. Wrestling is a great tool in that no matter how tough you are, you get humbled, you get smashed, you get humiliated at times, and you learn to get back up and dust off and get back into the mat and go get smashed again. And so I think part of that subconsciously helped me learn to just get back up. Part of that is just a resilience of spirit. I think when I left Goldman Sachs, I felt most sorry for myself and had the hardest time kind of getting my mojo back. And I remember running the Marathon of the Sands, which is this bizarre race where you run a marathon a day for 7 days in the middle of the Sahara Desert. It gets to 140 degrees during the day, and then it frickin' freezes at night. You've got to carry your own food. And it was right at the beginning of this whole adventure race craze. And it's brutal. Lost the skin on my feet. But about halfway through the race, I'm looking around. I'm in the gorgeous Sahara in the middle of Morocco with 700 other nut jobs. And I was like, God, it's good to be alive. Like, what the F was I complaining about? Like, you're alive, you're breathing, and it was that physicality of being alive. And that gave me the jolt to say, enough already. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Feeling sorry for you, suffering is all a story. And it's a very self-centric, selfish story, right? When you're suffering, it's, oh, woe's me. It's very narcissistic. It's all about yourself. And so the moment you can get out of yourself and think about others, it allows you to start shedding that feeling. The other thing is it's completely non-helpful. And so if you can step back and realize, all right, it's not only helping my kids or my family or my friends, but it's not helping me. And so I think that realization, to me, a few times it's been the athletic thing that's kicked it, but now it's more, philosophical. I actually now understand, and you can kind of meditate, what are you so angry about? What are you so beaten up about? Let it go and start over again.
That's great. And that's something that I've been hearing a lot often from the people that I've interviewed, including Justin Kahn, who's gone through sort of this emotional awareness of yourself. And I think that self, defeat or sabotage is something that you construct in your own head, and it's such a mental game. Take us back to flight school. What was it like to join during that time?
Yeah, luckily for us, Tom Cruise had done this movie Top Gun, and so it was really cool to be a fighter pilot. And you thought, okay, fighter pilot's going to get all the girls. And the movie was pretty right on to, there was volleyball on the beach and motorcycles. And the academics at flight school weren't difficult for me. They were difficult for some other people. Again, it was a confidence game. I'd come from Princeton, so I had this arrogance of academic preparation. And I'm sure if I'd come from a different school, I would have been intimidated. And so again, it's a mindset. It wasn't an intelligence thing. Flying is really interesting, and I was flying helicopters. When you start, there's your feet, your left hand and your right hand all doing different things, and it feels almost impossible to figure out. And you're like, your first hour, your first 2 hours trying to hover is literally impossible. And you're looking at all these other knuckleheads who have a month or 2 months ahead of you that are doing it, and you're like, wow. What's wrong with me? And then you learn this little secret that for every single person who tries to learn to hover, it all kicks in somewhere between hours 6 and 8. It takes your body that long to figure out how those things work together. It's like rubbing your head, patting your stomach, and jumping on one foot at the same time. And so part of the way you get through it is you're like, okay, I can't be that much different than all these other knuckleheads. And so once you learn the basics of flying, I kind of think there are two kinds of people, and those that are naturally loving it, they're adventure liking, and those that are scared. And for me, flying wasn't scary. It was fun. And so flight school was a joyous time for me because the academics were pretty easy and I loved flying. And so I didn't find it that intimidating. What was hard was not getting in trouble. The Army had 3 rules, right? No speeding, no DUIs, and no bad checks. And so keeping in those lanes back then in 1987 in Alabama, that was harder than the school itself.
So going from those fun times, how did you transition onto Wall Street and your Goldman Sachs career?
Well, I originally thought I would work in Washington. I thought politics would be so cool, and I went to D.C. and I interviewed, and you didn't get paid anything to work. And I got almost a few jobs, but they were for $13,000 a year, and I already owed people money, and it just didn't make any sense. And I met this ex-Princeton wrestler, actually, who had been an assistant secretary of the Army. And he said, son, let me give you some advice. Why don't you get out of D.C. and go to New York, make some money, and come back to D.C. when you have something to add. And it just sounded so intuitive. I was like, good idea. So I came up to New York, and I slept on a friend's couch. We had a deal. As long as I'd come up with a story every day, I could live for free. So there were some funny stories. And I interviewed around, and I luckily ran into a guy I knew from school, drunk at a bar called the Red Lion. And he said, you got to interview at Goldman Sachs. And Goldman is a brutal place to get a job because you interview 27 different people. You're like, enough already. But I ended up getting a job in money markets, off cycle. 1989, right in the middle of the year. And if you remember, in 1987, there was a stock market crash, a famous stock market crash. And so the intern classes went from 120 people to 10 because they fired all those interns. They didn't hire the next year. And so I was in the smallest intern class Goldman ever had that started in 89. But it was, again, it's so interesting because it's connectivity. These Ivy League schools or these pockets of connectivity are so important. In some ways, without running into my friend, drunk at a bar, I might not get that interview at Goldman Sachs. And so I always think the value of a Princeton education is worth a lot more than people do.
Do you ever think about running for politics now?
I love policy and politics. Part of running is, I think I said this in a newspaper, a magazine article. If I could do 10 years where I didn't do anything in my life that would embarrass my kids or my mom and dad or my sister, I'd run, because I do love service and I like the idea, but I don't seem to make it 3 weeks.
That's great.
And a little of that is my personality. I just came back from Toronto. I saw this movie with Brian Stevenson and another one with Mr. Rogers. And Brian has an integrity level that just has never wavered. Brian's a civil rights activist down in Alabama. And I think there's something about leadership in public life, in politics, that I want our guys to be, more Brian Stevensons. But maybe, I'm not never rule it out. But, right now I'm contributing in other ways.
Now for a quick word about our sponsors, and we'll be right back. In addition to being one of the best smart contracts blockchain in the world, with extremely low fees and easy-to-use platform, Qtum's proof-of-stake system lets anyone stake with as little as a fraction of a Qtum. To learn more and start building today, go to qtum.org. So let's talk about your contributions nowadays with Galaxy. Can you give our audience a little bit of an overview of what Galaxy is? Why did you start it?
Well, I started a family office originally because that's what you do when you're a washed-up rich Wall Streeter. And what do family offices do? Your sources of capital and your connectivity. You're a network, and I have built a wonderful network in my life. Partly because I'm hypersocial. I have a family network, a Princeton network. My brother-in-law runs the TED conference, and so the TED network, which is an amazing network, I've been to, for many, many years. I was a Goldman Sachs partner. That's a wildly powerful network, and I was a Wall Street guy for a long time at Fortress. And so, what a family office does is it reconnects that network and it looks for opportunities, and so both economic and philanthropic. And so that's, we originally, that was the idea. And then I went down and I saw Richard Branson at his island. I know there was a conference, a philanthropy conference. And I was noticing Virgin, everything he brands. And I was like, what a great idea. Because there's synergies between your business and your philanthropy and your other stuff. So I came back and was like, I'm going to brand everything Galaxy. So our philanthropy was going to be Galaxy Gives. And it was before I had this idea of Galaxy Digital as a public company to trade crypto. Crypto was one piece of lots of what we were doing. And quite frankly, it still is. It's a big piece in terms of my time. But downstairs we have a big philanthropy effort. We have a private equity effort. I have a macro trading effort. We have a company that owns Bojangles Fried Chicken, which is the best fried chicken in America by far. We're going to crush Popeyes, let alone frickin' Chick-fil-A. And so that's a ton of fun, like learning that business.
How did you discover them, the chicken place?
I didn't. I bet on two young guys, Matthew Bradshaw and Eric Saboka, who are, I think, world-class young investors. And we had a couple bets. We first bet big on the Churchill Downs Kentucky Derby and did well there. And then they had this idea of let's take, Bojangles private. It was a public company. And so we put up money, we raised money, and now we, are the sponsors of this 750 store, 25,000 person QSR, quick serve restaurant, which is cool, which is really, really an interesting barbell to crypto. And it's a way also of, I went to the Bojangles convention in Nashville, Tennessee, where they bring the franchisees and the people that provide product, And the new management team was giving the new pitch on how we're going to do better for the franchisees and for the customers and the communities we work in. And it was really interesting because in lots of ways it was like America. Our stores are based in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, mostly the South. The convention starts off with a prayer. You're not used to at Wall Street conventions that you have a prayer. Yeah. Crystal Beaver, who is this amazing franchisee, she started off with the prayer. Then there was the Pledge of Allegiance. I was like, the Pledge of Allegiance? Really? All right. And for me it was an opportunity to meet all these entrepreneurs. You run a Bojangles franchise or a quick food franchise, you're doing well. They're probably worth, if you think about it, $2 million a piece, and so people are running 5 or 10 or 15. So they're wealthy people that have made their money in a business so far from Wall Street. And so to me, it was just it has been so much fun kind of meeting America, through the chicken business.
That's awesome. Let's touch upon crypto.
All right, crypto.
So, let's do it. So how did you originally discover, when was the first time you heard the word Bitcoin? Take us back to that story.
Yeah. The same guy that got me my job at Goldman Sachs, or at least who got me my interview at Goldman Sachs, Pete Brigger, who then became a partner of mine when I was at Goldman and a partner of mine at Fortress, had moved out to San Francisco with his business. And in San Fran, Bitcoin was all the rage. And Pete was not a speculator, a markets guy. He's a credit investor, a distressed debt investor. But his friends were talking about it, so he called me up. He said, well, you heard about this Bitcoin. You should look into it. And so I quickly looked into it and said, good idea, dude. It's going to go higher. Let's buy some. And then we thought about it both, and we're like, it's going to be bigger than that. And so we brainstormed on how should we do it at Fortress? And we had a friend, Dan Moorhead, who now runs a company called Pantera, that was sitting on the sidelines. Pantera was originally a macro fund that he had shut down. And I had invested in it. And so he's a good friend of mine. He also went to Princeton. And so we called him up, and he took about 2 weeks to really research it. And he called back. He's like, dude, it's going to change the whole world. And, to Dan's credit, he put a lot of money into it as a percentage of his liquid net worth, forcing Pete and I to put at least as much in since we were already richer. And so between the three of us, we put a nice chunk of change in. And that was when Bitcoin was 95. And as it went higher, we looked at making other investments. And, at Fortress, it was an adjunct. We were taking risks through Pantera in our own accounts. And then the only reason I became kind of known with Bitcoin is having promised my partners we wouldn't talk about it publicly. I was at some conference, and I had no idea the press was there, and I was asked about frontier currencies, and I thought, screw frontier currencies. If you want a frontier bet, you should be in Bitcoin. And I explained the 5 reasons why I thought it would go to 1,000. It was at 120 at the time. And the next day I was on the cover of the FT. Fortress's Novogratz says Bitcoin going to 1,000. Luckily it did, but that's how I became like this unofficial spokesman in lots of ways. Then I started being asked to give speeches. I gave a speech here, and then at the Oxford Union, which is a really prestigious place. And so I actually had to really understand how it worked. And so I was frantically reading papers, and it was complicated back then. I mean, it's less complicated to me now, but I was trying to understand what this whole Persian general's problem was, and Byzantine fault tolerance, and so I sometimes say I'm an accidental Bitcoin guy. It was a speculative thing. When I left Fortress, I looked at my portfolio and said, okay, I hadn't paid attention to Bitcoin for a while because it had gone dead. Right? I remember it went up to 1,000, it went back to, and it was kind of 400 to 200, then 200 for about a year. And I looked at the charts, and I was like, the charts look like they're going to go up again. And so I called Joe Lubin, who's a friend of mine, another college roommate. Big Princeton connection in this story.
I love it.
And he had this company Consensus, and I literally thought it was 3 people. I went over to Brooklyn, and I was impressed. There were 25, 30 people, and they were busy, and they were plotting out this revolution in a decentralized world. They had a project, Ethereum. It was trading at 96 cents. They had already had their public launch and it had gone up some. And literally I was there an hour and I was like, dude, I should buy this company. And at one point, Joe and I talked about me buying a chunk of his company. But it was so decentralized, he couldn't really even write it down at that point, like what I'd be buying. And I was like, I'll just buy those ethers. And it was much harder to buy than one would think. There was there wasn't a lot of volume, but I ended up buying my first chunk of ethers from Vitalik, the founder, or one of the founders. And it started going up, and I bought a bunch. And so whenever you make money in something, you're more apt to dig in and try to understand it. And then I was kind of hooked. I was like, this is going to be real, and it's going to be not just an amazing bubble. And I was pretty convinced. I've studied bubbles my whole life. It had all the makings of what would make for an amazing bubble, but it was going to actually be transformative. Most bubbles transform society. They're bubbles because the story is so powerful, it's easy to sell. So you think the internet bubble, right? In 1999, the best MP3 player to play music on you could get, because I bought it, played 8 songs.
Wow.
8 songs at the height of the internet bubble.
Wow.
And now you can download the entire canon of music from civilization in an iPhone, right? We use the internet so much more today, 20 years after the bubble, than we ever dreamed of it in 99. It's so much more ubiquitous. The way we date, the way we have sex, quite frankly, the way we elect presidents, the way we shop, the way we watch movies, everything about our lives, the way we navigate, in our cars, even when we're walking down the street to find a restaurant. Everything about our lives has changed because of the internet. So that story was so powerful. That's why there was a bubble in 99. And quite frankly, it took 20 years to get back to that same level, or 17 years, whatever. And so crypto felt like it had those same. It was global. It was going to be Web 3.0. At the same time, it was going to be a new store of value. We were going to tokenize everything. There are lots of different stories all mixed into this big story. And most importantly, it was an FU to the system. It was, we don't trust the system because they screwed us in 2008 and they screwed us in 2012, and they're always going to screw the little man. And so this was the people's revolution. And it was a global people's revolution. It was the first global speculative bubble we've ever seen. And it was the only one that I can see that started from the people, not from the institutions. And so I called that well. It made sense to me, and traded it well. And what bubbles do is they suck human capital and infrastructure into the ecosystem. And so I do think, as painful as that 17 bubble was to some people, and profitable it was to others, the good side of it is it brought lots of human capital and money into the system that's being spent, and now what you're seeing grow out of it is a more sober, more defined, or I'd say broken into buckets, crypto revolution that's still happening. That's going to happen at a much more steadied pace. And that I think you can break up into different buckets. Bitcoin, as it's in a weird way, has this magic of store of value. There are 114 elements on the periodic table, and only gold is valued just because it's valuable. Mm-hmm. Everything else has to be used, right? There's a use case for copper. And so we look at copper and we discount, how much copper are we going to use and how much it should be worth. Gold's valuable just because it's valuable, right? The Incas and the Mayans and the ancient Egyptians, it got its power from God in lots of ways. Bitcoin is a little bit like that. There's a magic to it, right? I don't think it could be Bitcoin if we knew the creator, quite frankly. Vitalik, you wouldn't want the human psyche wouldn't want one person to be able to make too much on it or create it, but because it was mysteriously just showed up, it's now won the crypto battle for digital gold, and it is being adopted around the world as a digital store of value. Even if it's never used for other use cases, that's okay. It's kind of got its finished product, just being a store of value. We don't spend gold to buy tennis shoes or jewelry, jewelry we do, but houses or clothing. We just store gold because we think it's going to be more valuable tomorrow, and it's going to preserve our sense of wealth. And I see that happening with Bitcoin. And what's unique is if you think about gold as it's valuable because it's valuable, that means you need the next person to buy it, right? You need the next person to buy it. So you need a marketing mechanism for that. So it was a shiny metal, it marketed itself. So Bitcoin's got this marketing mechanism now as you get more and more people. I was writing down a list of 20 billionaires that are Bitcoin advocates that didn't make their money in crypto, right? From Abby Johnson to Bill Miller to Pete Brigger, my old partner, to Mark Andreessen. I mean, just more and more guys showing up and saying, hey, this is real. Wences Casares, Mickey Melker. And so you've got this growing army of people that believe in this as a store of value. And it's valuable because of that belief system. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for people to get their arms around. You're like, wait, you're telling me it's valuable just because you say it is? I was like, not because I say it is, because enough people say it is. And so I am really optimistic on the future of Bitcoin. We have more and more rails being put in so to allow people to buy it. It's getting easier. Soon enough, you're going to be able to buy it on your Fidelity account. You can't do it yet, but the moment there's an ETF, the moment there's a mutual fund, the moment there's you're going to see more and more people feel comfortable buying it. And so think of that as bucket one of the crypto revolution, and you can put a check on it. So bucket two, which is probably in some ways the more transformative piece, which would be Web 3.0. How can we rebuild the internet in a way where privacy isn't all held in these giant data, silos, where Google and Facebook and don't everything on the internet and don't take all the value. And there's tons of projects being built, right? Ethereum by far the leader, but Affinity and Hashgraph and EOS, and so there are 25 odd projects vying to be part of what we call Web 3.0. That's still a really exciting piece of the puzzle. It's where the real big human capital is focused, the computer science capital. The reality there is that takes a long time, and we're making progress. There's a big developer community. It got way ahead of itself price-wise, because that's going to need first to be used to be valuable. Mm-hmm. You're going to say, wait a minute, and there'll be some discount cash flow weird formula that we use to say, hey, Ether is worth X because it's being used this many hundreds of millions of times, and you need to own it to use it. And so you'll have some calculation on why it's worth something. For it to be worth zillions, it then has to transition into money, just like Bitcoin has transitioned to money, store of value, same thing. And so we're optimistic on that, but we're sober on that. Mm-hmm. That's going to take a little bit longer.
Thanks so much for listening to that episode. That is the end of part one of the Mike Novogratz episode. Please join us next week for part two, as we discuss his further insights into blockchain and Bitcoin, his passion for prison reform, and we get to know him a little bit better during our rapid fire session. See you there. New episodes launch every Tuesday at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to continue the conversation, you can find me on Twitter at Mayra Ceja 007, and I'll see you next time.